All right, this is an example of a mixed ANOVA. So a mixed ANOVA involves a between subjects variable and a within subjects variable analyzed together. So this is an example of a 2x2 within and between subjects design. So what we're going to do is actually use the same data that we used previously in an example of an independent samples t-test. The reason for this is to show what a mixed ANOVA can do that will sort of help strengthen some of the outcomes or the ways that you can analyze the same question. So our original question was, does cognitive behavioral therapy treat anxiety symptoms better than nothing or a waitlist control? And initially, we had randomly assigned students to cognitive behavioral therapy or a waitlist, and we also had their pre-treatment and post-treatment anxiety scores. In the independent samples t-test, we only looked at the post-treatment anxiety, but really pre- and post-treatment could be considered a within subjects variable. That is, we looked at their scores at the beginning and at the end of their treatment experience. So if we consider that our within variable and treatment condition as our between variable, that means that students are either in one or in the other condition. This will allow us to evaluate the null hypothesis that there's no difference between these conditions, but evaluate our alternatives a little bit more nuanced. So in this case, we're expecting that there will be a greater change in anxiety across time from pre to post in the CBT condition compared with the control condition. Notice the way this is phrased just includes the fact that we're going to look at their pre-scores and then see about whether they changed or whether they were simply less anxious to begin with. And we're going to use the same data, which is Psych 200, CBT, and anxiety. So what we're really hypothesizing is an interaction. So we expect an interaction between our between subjects variable, treatment, and our within subjects variable, time. And specifically, we expect that greater change in anxiety will occur in the CBT group than in the control group over time. All right, so let's take a look at the data. So remember that each row represents one person, and so this might be Sally, and Sally received CBT. Sally had pretty high anxiety at the beginning, and then her anxiety went down moderately. In contrast, here is, say, Joe. Joe had lower anxiety to begin with than Sally did, and his anxiety actually increased a little bit over time. So this allows us to take into consideration both of these at the same time as representing which treatment condition Joe and Sally were in. So we're going to go to Analyze, and in this case, we're going to need to use the repeated measures option because we have at least one within subjects variable. Now we need to label our factor, and our within subjects or repeated variable is time, and it has two levels. Oh, and I had already done this, so let me try it again here. Time with two levels, and the measure name represents, well, what does that time variable measure? What it measures is anxiety. The reason for this is that we have anxiety pre and anxiety post, and that measures change over time within each person. Oops. All right, here we go. Now I'm into the within subjects variable, and it's asking me which variables over here need to be plugged into these two within subjects variables. In this case, I'm looking at pre-treatment anxiety to go first and post-treatment to be second. Our treatment condition is a between subjects factor, and that's everything that we need. Now I'm going to ask for the plots because this is going to help me to be able to visualize what's happening. So I'm going to put treatment in the separate lines category, and I'm going to put time in the horizontal axis. When I do this, it allows me to see pre and post across the horizontal axis, and I see two different colored lines, one for the CBT condition and one for the control group. If I had more than two groups, I would ask for post hocs, but since I just have 2 and 2 in each of the variables, I won't really need to kind of dig into the differences to see where they exist. Okay, so when we hit OK, now this orients me to what I have. Label 1 is for the cognitive behavioral group, label 2 is for the waitlist control, and that's my between subjects factor. So when I look down here, I'm going to skip over the multivariate tests, even though they're really telling us the same thing as what we look down below. The test of sphericity is not something that we're going to get to check because that's only when we have 3 or more groups to take a look at. So we're going to skip past that as well. Now I'm going to come down to within subjects effects. And really in this analysis, there's one thing that I'm most interested in, and that is the interaction of time by treatment. So while I will certainly report all the other pieces, the main effect for time or a main effect for treatment, what I am really interested in is this interaction, time by treatment. So I'm going to use the sphericity assumed option, and what I see here is an F value of 24 and a significance value of less than 0.05. This lets me know that there is a significant difference in changes in time by the treatment category. So let's take a look at what that means. I'm going to take a look down here at my plot, and this is really helpful to look at to orient myself to what's exactly happening. So down here I have time, pre-treatment and post-treatment, and up here I have in blue the cognitive behavioral group and in green the waitlist control group. At the beginning of treatment, anxiety scores were roughly the same in both groups. At the end of treatment, look at how the cognitive behavioral group really has a steep decline in their symptoms, whereas the control group also reduces their symptoms over time, but much, much less dramatically. So this is representing a specific kind of interaction that I could describe in a couple of sentences by saying that there was significantly greater change or greater reduction in anxiety in the CBT group over time compared to the waitlist control group over time. If I were interested in the between subjects effects, here's where I would notice. So notice that treatment, when I see this F statistic, it shows that there is a main effect for treatment. I'm not really interested in that because the treatment comparison here is taking into account the pre and post anxiety averaged. And that's not really something that conceptually is very useful to me because I assume that their pre-score has nothing to do with whether they got treatment or not, right? So that's something that in this particular case only I might ignore. I will probably report it, but it's not part of my hypothesis. The time variable is also significant. And this makes sense when we look at the plot because as you can notice, even in the control group, people improved their anxiety a little bit over time. So we see an F value that is high and a significance level as well. And this is our within subjects contrast. Notice this is the same thing as what we see up here. So you can look at either place and find the same information, the contrasts or effects. So taken together, what this tells me is I have a main effect for treatment, a main effect for time, and a main effect or main interaction between both variables. And in this case, what this tells me is that improvements in anxiety were significantly better in the CBT group when compared to the waitlist control. And that both groups really didn't differ much from each other at the beginning of treatment, which is a good thing since they were randomly assigned.